My sister smirked over dessert and let it slip. You know, Jennifer, maybe if your son had two parents, he wouldn't be such a walking disappointment. In that exact heartbeat, I realized that the next 45 days were going to dismantle her life down to the foundation, and I wasn't going to regret a single cent I spent on her total destruction. It all started much earlier than this dinner, 4 years ago to be precise, when my husband died in a car accident. From that day on, my perfect family turned into a pack of vultures who masked their cruelty as sincere concern. My sister Lauren was always the golden child. She had everything. A wealthy husband named David, a massive colonial mansion in a prestigious neighborhood, 2 children who were the gold standard of upbringing, according to our mother, and an endless stream of social media posts about her fairy tale life. To them, I was just an object of pity. A single mother living in a tiny apartment which I had actually paid off in full, working long hours at a bank and supposedly barely scraping by. I never tried to convince them otherwise. I thought humility was a virtue. I wanted my son, Marcus, to grow up understanding the value of hard work, rather than measuring people by the brand of their car. But Lauren saw my silence as weakness. At every Sunday dinner, she found a way to needle me. She'd casually mention how they spent 3 weeks in Europe while Marcus and I vacationed at the local park, or she'd start theorizing about how children from single-parent homes lack discipline, and my parents always played along. My father would look at Marcus with that patronizing, encouraging gaze that makes you want to climb the walls, and my mother was constantly shoving envelopes with a couple of $100s at me, accompanied by a sigh. Take it, dear, buy the boy some decent clothes. I endured it for Marcus. I wanted him to have grandparents, to feel a connection to his family, but I didn't realize how deep those poisonous remarks were sinking into his heart. A month ago, he asked me if it was his fault his dad died, because Lauren had said at Easter that we were half a family, and children always pay for the sins of their parents. Something snapped inside me then. But instead of throwing a tantrum, I started gathering information. You see, Lauren didn't know one tiny detail. I don't just work at a bank. I am the regional loan officer, the youngest in our county's history. And across my desk pass documents that can turn a perfect life into ash in seconds. 3 weeks ago, a notification for a past due mortgage payment popped up in my system. The address looked painfully familiar. It was Lauren's mansion. As it turned out, her successful husband David had lost his job 6 months ago, and they had been living off credit cards the entire time, trying to maintain the illusion of wealth. They owed the bank over $17,000, and the foreclosure process had already been initiated. But that wasn't even the most ironic part. The most ironic part was that for the last 3 months, I had been secretly transferring $1,200 a month to their mortgage account from my personal savings. I did it anonymously through the interbank transfer system, simply because I didn't want my niece and nephew to end up on the street. I hoped this help would give them time to get back on their feet, and that maybe Lauren would become a little kinder, feeling supported even without knowing the source. How wrong I was. That dinner started as usual. The smell of roast beef, expensive wine, which I now knew was bought with the last bit of credit, and Lauren's endless bragging. She was talking about new horseback riding lessons for her kids, then shifted her gaze to Marcus, who was quietly eating his portion. He's so withdrawn, Jen, she said, sipping her wine. Maybe you should take him to a specialist? In such incomplete environments, children often suffer from developmental delays. My father nodded. Lauren's right, Jennifer. The boy needs structure. A male figure. You work too much. He's left to his own devices. I looked at Marcus. His ears were beet red, his head was down, and I saw his hand trembling as he gripped his fork. In that moment I knew. The time for silence was over. I had a folder in my bag that I'd been carrying for 3 days. I hadn't wanted to take it out. I had hoped until the last second that I wouldn't have to. But when Lauren smirked and dropped that line about him being a walking disappointment, I simply reached for the zipper of my purse. Lauren, I said, my voice perfectly steady, before we continue discussing my son's upbringing, don't you want to tell Mom and Dad why your house is going up for auction in 45 days? The table fell into a silence so heavy you could hear the clock ticking in the hallway. The wine in Lauren's glass froze. She turned so pale she looked like a ghost. It was the beginning of the end for their perfect world. and I was going to savor every second of the collapse. The silence at the table was suffocating, the kind of heavy, thick air that makes your lungs ache. Lauren's eyes darted toward David, whose face had gone from a healthy tan to a sickly, mottled gray in a matter of seconds. My mother's fork clattered against her fine china, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the dining room. For 4 years, I had been the silent spectator of my own life, the unfortunate sister who was lucky to be invited to these opulent Sunday dinners. But as I sat there, watching the mask of perfection crack across Lauren's face, I didn't feel the rush of joy I expected. I felt a cold, calculated clarity. I realized that my family didn't just pity me. They needed me to be beneath them so they could feel like they were standing on a pedestal. "What are you talking about, Jennifer?" my father finally barked, his voice laced with that familiar irritation he saved for whenever I disrupted the peace. "Auction? Don't be ridiculous. Lauren and David are doing exceptionally well. David just closed that big consultancy deal last quarter." I looked at David, who was staring intently at his steak, his hands visibly shaking under the table. He knew. He knew exactly what I had seen on my computer screen at the bank. He knew that the consultancy deal was a lie he'd fed the family to cover up the fact that his firm had let him go 6 months ago for restructuring. "Is that right, David?" I asked, my voice conversational, almost pleasant. Was that before or after the bank sent the first notice of default in October? Or perhaps it was around the time the second notice arrived in November. I leaned back, crossing my arms. I wasn't looking at my parents anymore. I was looking at Lauren. Her smirk was gone, replaced by a twitch at the corner of her mouth. She looked like a trapped animal, yet even then, her first instinct wasn't honesty. It was to attack. "You're lying," she hissed, her voice a low, dangerous tremor. "You're just bitter because we have a real home and you're stuck in that cramped, depressing apartment. You're trying to drag us down to your level because you can't stand seeing Marcus fail while my children thrive." That was the moment I realized Lauren wasn't just struggling. She was delusional. She had spent so long building this facade on social media, and at these dinners that she had started to believe her own lies. She truly thought that her status was permanent, and that my lowly position at the bank was just a place where I counted other people's money. She had no idea that I was the one who signed off on her lifestyle. She didn't know that every time she posted a photo of her new designer shoes or their spontaneous weekend getaway to Aspen, I was looking at her mounting credit card debt on my work monitor, wondering how much longer the house of cards could stand. "I'm not lying, Lauren. I work as the regional loan officer for the very bank that holds your mortgage," I said, my tone flat, devoid of the emotion she wanted from me. "I don't just see numbers. I see the legal filings. I see the sheriff's sales schedule. And your names, dear sister, are right at the top of the list for next month." My mother reached out, her hand fluttering toward Lauren's arm. "Lauren, honey, tell her she's mistaken. Tell your father this is all a big misunderstanding." But Lauren couldn't speak. She was hyperventilating, her chest heaving under her expensive silk blouse. The most heartbreaking part wasn't the look on Lauren's face, though. It was Marcus. He was looking at me with wide, confused eyes. He had spent years hearing that we were struggling, that we were lucky to have this family, and now he was watching the people he was told to emulate crumble before him. I saw him process the fact that the aunt who called him a disappointment was actually a fraud. But I couldn't let him see the full extent of my anger yet. I had to keep the tension building. I had to show them that I wasn't just a victim of their words. I was the architect of their current reality, and they didn't even know the half of it. "David," my father said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly low register. "Is there any truth to this?" David finally looked up, and for a second I almost felt sorry for him. He looked broken. "Things have been tight, Arthur," he whispered. "The market shifted. I thought I could flip a few properties to cover the gap, but the interest rates." Lauren let out a sharp, jagged laugh. "Tight? David, tell them the truth. Tell them Jennifer is making this up because she's jealous." She turned to me, her eyes bloodshot. "You think you're so smart because you sit behind a desk? You're nothing. You're a widow who couldn't even keep her husband alive. And now you're trying to kill my family too." The room went ice cold. My mother gasped, and even my father looked shocked at the cruelty of that statement. But I didn't flinch. I just reached into my folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper. The record of the $1,200 monthly transfers from my personal account to their mortgage. I slid it across the table toward Lauren. I've been paying your bills for 90 days, Lauren. While you were busy insulting my parenting and mocking my son's development, I was the only thing keeping a roof over your children's heads. I watched her eyes scan the document. I watched the realization sink in that her enemy had been her secret benefactor. And then I saw the most disgusting thing of all. The shame in her eyes turned back into rage. She didn't want my help. She wanted my submission. I didn't ask for your charity, she screamed, crumpling the paper into a ball and throwing it at me. You did this to make yourself feel superior. You've been sitting on this waiting for the perfect moment to humiliate me. She stood up, her chair screeching against the hardwood floor. Well, keep your blood money. We don't need it. David will find the money. Dad will help us. Right, Dad? She looked at our father, her eyes pleading. But for the first time in her life, our father didn't immediately jump to her defense. He was looking at the crumpled paper on the floor, then at me, then back at his golden daughter. The tension was at a breaking point, but the real conflict was only just beginning to boil. My father didn't reach for his checkbook. He didn't even look at Lauren. He just stared at the crumpled paper on the floor as if it were a physical wound. The atmosphere in the dining room shifted from shock to something much darker, much more volatile. The air felt heavy with the smell of expensive food that no one could swallow. Lauren was still standing, her chest heaving, waiting for the patriarch to step in and fix her world as he always had. But the silence stretched on for 10, 15, 20 seconds, and with every tick of the clock, the pressure in the room climbed. Arthur, my mother whispered, her voice trembling. Say something. We have to help them. They're family. My father finally looked up, but his eyes weren't on Lauren. They were fixed on me. You've been paying their mortgage, Jennifer? For 3 months. Without saying a word to us? He didn't sound grateful. He sounded offended. It was that same tone he used when I decided to go back to work instead of moving into the guest house he offered after the funeral. He didn't like that I had power he hadn't granted me. I did it because I didn't want the kids to lose their home, I said, my voice cutting through the tension like a blade. But I also did it because I wanted to see how far Lauren would go. I wanted to see if there was any limit to the arrogance of a woman who is living on her sister's pity, while calling her a failure. Lauren let out a sound that was half sob, half growl. You're a monster, Jennifer. You set us up. You've been playing some sick game while we were struggling. She lunged toward the table, grabbing her wine glass and slamming it down so hard the stem snapped. Red wine splashed across the white tablecloth like a bloodstain. You think you're better than me? Because you have a stable job? You're a bean counter. A nobody. You've been stalking our finances waiting to pounce. David finally found his voice, though it was weak and cracking. Jen, please. It was just a temporary setback. I had a plan. I was going to pay it back once the new firm launched. What new firm, David? I asked, leaning forward, my eyes locking onto his. The one you haven't even registered? Or the one you've been using as an excuse to go to meetings, while you actually sit in the park and drink coffee all day? David's face drained of what little color was left. He looked at Lauren, and the betrayal in her eyes was instantaneous. She hadn't known the full extent of his unemployment. She thought he was hustling. Now the lie was unraveling in front of everyone. You told me you were consulting for the Miller Group. She screamed at him, her hands clawing at the air. You told me we were fine. We would have been fine if your sister hadn't decided to play God. David shouted back, finally turning his anger toward the easiest target, me. He stood up, towering over the table, pointing a finger at my face. You had no right to look at our files. That's a violation of privacy. I could have you fired for this. I didn't even blink. Go ahead and try, David. But before you do, remember that I'm the one who flagged your account for internal review, instead of immediate foreclosure 3 months ago. I'm the only reason you weren't served by the sheriff in front of your neighbors in November. I wasn't playing God. I was playing your guardian angel and you just spat in my face. The conflict was now a three-way fire. Lauren was screaming at David for lying. David was threatening me with legal action to cover his shame. And my parents were caught in the middle, trying to decide which lie to protect. My mother started crying, a high-pitched, irritating sound that only added to the chaos. "Stop it! All of you! This is Sunday dinner. Think of the children." She gestured toward my niece and nephew, who were staring at their tablets with wide, terrified eyes, and then at Marcus. Marcus! I looked at my son. He wasn't crying. He was watching them with a cold, analytical expression that mirrored my own. He saw the perfect family for exactly what they were. A collection of fragile egos held together by debt and deception. He saw his successful uncle crumbling and his perfect aunt losing her mind. And then the tension hit its peak. Lauren turned her rage back to the one person who couldn't fight back. She looked at Marcus and pointed her shaking, wine-stained finger at him. "This is your fault. If Jennifer wasn't so obsessed with proving she's a strong, independent mother, for you, she wouldn't have done this to us. You're the reason she's so bitter. You're just a burden, Marcus. Do you hear me? A burden that destroyed her life and is now destroying ours." The room went deathly silent. My father's jaw dropped. My mother stopped mid-sob. Even David looked horrified. You don't say that to a 10-year-old child. You don't tell a boy who lost his father that he is the reason his family is falling apart. I felt a heat rise in my chest that I had never felt before. A pure white-hot protective rage. I didn't scream. I didn't throw wine. I stood up slowly, the silence in the room now belonging entirely to me. "Lauren," I said, my voice so low it was almost a whisper, yet it filled every corner of the room. "You have exactly 10 seconds to apologize to my son before I make sure the bank moves your foreclosure date from 45 days to 14. Lauren's face twisted into a mask of pure hate. She knew she was cornered, but her pride was a terminal illness. She looked at Marcus, then back at me, and she smiled. It was a sick, desperate smirk. "Or what? You'll stop the transfers? You already told us you're the hero. Heroes don't kick families out on the street, Jen. You don't have the guts. You need us to look down on you so you can feel like a martyr." I didn't wait for 10 seconds. I pulled my phone out of my pocket, opened the banking app, and held it up for everyone to see. "This is the final transfer I made on Friday," I said, my thumb hovering over the reverse transaction button, a feature available for pending internal bank transfers. "It's for the full amount of your December payment. If I press this, you're officially 90 days late. The legal department gets the notification instantly. There will be no more internal reviews. No more delays." "Jennifer, don't," my father warned, finally standing up. "This has gone too far. Put the phone down." He moved toward me, trying to take the role of the peacemaker now that his world was on fire. But I stepped back, my eyes fixed on Lauren. "Apologize to my son now." Lauren leaned across the table, her face inches from mine, smelling of wine and desperation. "Make me," she hissed. I pressed the button. The screen flashed. "Transaction reversed successfully." "There," I said, the tension finally snapping into a cold, hard reality. "Now you don't have 45 days. You have until the end of the week before the legal notices are posted on your front door for all your perfect friends to see. And David, don't bother calling my office. I've already recused myself from your file due to a conflict of interest. You're in the hands of the corporate recovery team now, and they don't know you. They don't care about your consulting jobs. They only care about the $17,000 you don't have." The look on Lauren's face wasn't one of anger anymore. It was pure, unadulterated terror. The reality of the situation had finally pierced through her delusion. She had pushed me too far, and she had just realized that the sister she had spent 4 years belittling was the only person who had been standing between her and total ruin. And I wasn't standing there anymore. The digital chime of my phone confirming the reversal felt like a guillotine blade dropping in the middle of the dining room. Lauren stared at the screen, her mouth hanging open, the realization finally bypassing her ego and hitting her nervous system. David slumped back into his chair, the air leaving his lungs in a long, rattling wheeze. For years they had treated me like a safety net they could kick and soil at their leisure, never imagining the net was actually a trapdoor. You can't just do that," my mother stammered, her hands hovering over the wine-stained tablecloth. "Jennifer, that's your sister. Those are your niece and nephew. Where will they go? You're acting like a stranger." Not like a member of this family. I turned to her, and for the first time, I didn't see a mother whose approval I craved. I saw a woman who had traded my son's dignity for the sake of a quiet dinner. They'll go wherever people go when they spend money they don't have and insult the only person helping them, I said. And as for family, Mom, you lost the right to use that word the moment you let Lauren call Marcus a burden. My father stood tall, trying to regain his authority. Enough. David, Lauren, go to the living room. Jennifer, we're going to sit down and figure out a loan. I will cover the arrears, and you will fix this mess with the bank tomorrow morning. I won't have the family name dragged through the mud because of a sibling spat. He said it with such certainty, as if his checkbook could erase the last hour. I looked at him and almost laughed. That's the thing, Dad. You can't. I pulled out a second document from the folder. A printout I'd flagged just yesterday. I know why you're so eager to protect their perfect house. It's because you used your own home as collateral for David's business expansion loan 2 years ago. If their house goes into foreclosure, the bank triggers a cross-default clause. They'll come after your property next to satisfy the debt. The blood drained from my father's face. The room went so quiet I could hear the hum of the refrigerator. This was the secret they had all been keeping from me. They weren't just protecting Lauren's feelings. They were protecting their own assets. My parents had gambled their retirement on David's lies. And now the stakes weren't just Lauren's colonial mansion. It was the house I grew up in. You knew, my father whispered, his voice failing him. I found out yesterday, I replied. I spent all night trying to find a way to restructure the debt, so you wouldn't be affected. I was going to offer to buy the debt from the bank personally using my savings. I was going to save you all despite everything. I paused, looking at Lauren, who was now clutching her stomach as if she were physically ill. But then I came here tonight. I listened to you mock my dead husband. I watched you break my son's spirit. And I realized that by saving your house, I would be keeping Marcus in a prison of your judgment for the rest of his life. Lauren looked up, her eyes wild. You're going to let Mom and Dad lose their home just to get back at me? You're that vindictive? You'd ruin everyone? I looked at Marcus. He was standing by the door now, holding his coat, waiting for me. He looked older than 10. He looked like he had seen enough. It's not about vindictiveness, Lauren. It's about a choice, I said. I have enough in my savings to clear the entire debt tomorrow. $230,000 to be exact. I could save Lauren's house, Dad's house, and David's reputation with one signature. The hope that flared in the room was almost pathetic. My mother reached for my hand, her eyes shining with sudden fake affection. David started to stand up, a desperate apology forming on his lips. Even Lauren straightened her back, preparing to accept the charity she had just screamed at. But here's the dilemma, I continued, my voice hardening. If I save you, I teach my son that love means rewarding the people who hurt you. I teach him that money can buy off cruelty. So I've decided to give you a choice. I will pay off the debt and save both houses tonight under one condition. Lauren, you have to sign a legal document admitting that you lied about your finances, that you've been living on my money, and you have to agree to never see or speak to Marcus again. You forfeit your role as an aunt. You become a ghost to us. The room gasped. It was a brutal ultimatum. I was asking her to choose between her pride and her parents' survival. I was asking her to put a price on the very family she claimed to cherish. You're insane, Lauren breathed. You're asking me to cut myself off from my own family? No, I corrected her. I'm asking you to stay away from my son. You can keep the house, the status, and the lies. You just can't have us. I checked my watch. You have until the end of dinner to decide. If you don't sign, the reversal stands, the foreclosure proceeds, and Dad's house goes with it. Your move, Lauren. I sat back down and picked up my fork, but the silence was now a ticking time bomb. Every person at that table was now forced to weigh the value of their perfect life against the cost of their arrogance. And I knew better than anyone that Lauren's pride was the most expensive thing in the room. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway felt like a hammer hitting a nail. Lauren looked at the folder, then at our parents, then at the shattered wine glass on the table. Her face was a storm of conflicting emotions, humiliation, greed, and a deep-seated hatred that she could no longer hide behind a smirk. My father was leaning over the table, his eyes pleading with her. "Lauren, just sign it," he hissed, his voice cracked with desperation. "It's just a piece of paper. We'll lose everything if you don't." Lauren's eyes snapped to his. "A piece of paper? She's trying to erase me. She wants to hold this over my head forever." She turned back to me, her voice shrill and jagged. "You think you won, don't you? You think you can buy my family and then kick me out? You're just like you've always been, cold, calculating, and heartless. No wonder you're alone." I didn't answer. I just looked at my watch. 2 minutes, Lauren. Either you sign the agreement and I call the bank's emergency line to halt the reversal, or we walk out that door. If we leave, the process becomes automated. Not even I can stop it once the clock strikes midnight. The air in the room was so thin it felt like we were at the top of a mountain. David was whispering to Lauren, probably begging her to save his skin, but she pushed him away. She grabbed the pen I had placed on the table, her hand shaking so violently the ink splattered on the page. She scribbled her name. A messy, angry signature that looked more like a scar than a name. She hurled the pen at me, hitting my shoulder before it clattered to the floor. "There. Are you happy now, you bitch? You saved the houses. Now get out of my sight." I picked up the paper, folded it neatly, and placed it in my folder. I pulled out my phone, made a 60-second call to the bank's night duty manager, and confirmed the authorization for the debt hold. When I hung up, the tension in the room didn't dissipate. It just changed shape. My parents looked relieved, but they wouldn't look at me. David was staring at the table, his success officially branded a lie. And Lauren was sobbing, her head in her hands, the sound of her perfect life finally shattering for good. "We're leaving now," I said, standing up and reaching for Marcus's hand. "Jennifer, wait," my mother said, stepping toward us. She looked like she wanted to hug me, but I stepped back. We should talk about this. Next Sunday, maybe? We can move past this." I looked at her, and for the first time in my life, I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no need for her love, no desire to be understood. "There won't be a next Sunday, Mom," I said quietly. I didn't make Lauren sign that because I wanted to be petty. I did it because I needed to see if she valued her pride more than your home. She hesitated, Mom. She almost let you lose your house just to avoid admitting she's a fraud. That's the family you've been choosing over me for 30 years. As Marcus and I walked to the car, the cool night air felt like a benediction. I buckled him in and sat in the driver's seat, resting my hands on the steering wheel. My phone was already blowing up with texts, apologies from David, furious rants from Lauren, and guilt-tripping messages from my father. I turned the phone off and tossed it into the glove box. "Mom?" Marcus asked as we pulled out of the driveway, leaving the glowing windows of the colonial mansion behind us. "Yeah, buddy? Are they going to be okay?" I thought about it. I had saved their houses, but I had destroyed their illusions. Lauren would spend the rest of her life knowing she was bought and paid for by the sister she despised. My parents would live in a house that was a constant reminder of their failure to protect their own daughter. David would have to face the man in the mirror who couldn't provide for his children. "They'll have a roof over their heads, Marcus," I said. "But they won't be okay. Not for a long time. Some things can't be fixed with a bank transfer." "I'm glad we're going home," he said, leaning his head against the window. "Our apartment is better. It's quieter." I smiled, and a single tear finally escaped, rolling down my cheek. He was right. We were going back to our small, depressing apartment that was filled with honesty, hard work, and a love that didn't have a price tag. I realized then that the 45 days I thought would be about destroying Lauren were actually about liberating myself. I had spent 4 years trying to prove I was enough for them, only to realize I was already too much for them to handle. As we drove into the city, the bright lights of the skyline reflecting in the windshield, I felt a profound sense of peace. The folder in the back seat was full of secrets and legal threats, but in my heart, the ledger was finally balanced. Sometimes the only way to win a game is to stop playing it. I didn't need their dinner table anymore. I had my own. And at my table, everyone was welcome, as long as they left their masks at the door.